everyone. How are you? I hope everyone is okay. Welcome to the second episode of Reading Practice series. If you remember, I divided into my YouTube channel into four different sections, and it is much more easier to develop, much more easier to follow it. I believe. Please write your commentaries before starting. I just want to mention about it. I'm really excited because this series is a little bit different from the others, if you remember. The first one in Literature Power, we focus on literary works and the ideas that they explore. In American Cultural Myths, we talk about culture and society. In academia life, I share my experiences as a lecturer and interpreter, a researcher. But this series has a different purpose because here I want to focus on one question that students ask me all the time. How do we actually read literature? Not just how do we finish book, but how do we read it carefully? How do we notice things that are easy to miss? How do we move from simply understanding the story to interpreting its deeper meanings? So today I want to start with what I think is the first and perhaps the most important reading skill, learning to read beyond the plot. When we first began studying literature, it's very natural to focus on what happens, right? Who are the characters? What is the conflict? How does the story end? Every interpretation begins with understanding the narrative. But literary reading doesn't stop there. Imagine that someone asks you about the Great Gatsby. You could answer, it's about a wealthy man named Gatsby who loves Daisy. Technically, that's correct. But have you really read The Great Gatsby? Not yet. Because literature is never only about what happens, it's also about why it happens, how it is told, and what larger ideas the story invites us to think about. One thing I often tell my students is this: a plot tells you what happened, an interpretation tells you why it matters. That difference changes everything. So, how do we move beyond the plot? I usually begin with a very simple exercise. Whenever I finish reading a chapter or a short story, I ask myself three questions. And the first one, what is repeated? Writers rarely repeat something by accident. Maybe a color appears again and again, maybe a particular object keeps returning, maybe one emotion dominates the text. The second question is, what surprised me? Sometimes we read too quickly and miss unusual details. A strange sentence, an unexpected silence, a conversation that feels incomplete. Those moments deserve attention because authors often place meaning where readers least expect it. And finally, I ask, why did the author choose this instead of something else? Why this narrator? Why this ending? Why this image? Why this word? So the moment we began asking why, literary analysis begins. Another mistake many students make is believing there is only one correct interpretation. Of course, interpretations need evidence. We cannot invent meanings that the text doesn't support. But good literature usually allows multiple thoughtful readings. That is one of the reasons literature remains relevant across generations. Different readers notice different things, right? Different historical moments produce different questions, and every careful reading reveals something new. This is why I encourage students not to rush. Sometimes one paragraph deserves 10 minutes. Sometimes one sentence deserves an entire notebook page. Close reading is slow reading, and slow reading is not a weakness. It is a skill. I also want to share something from my own experience. When I was an undergraduate student, I often felt pressure to understand everything immediately. If I didn't understand a difficult paragraph, I thought I simply wasn't good enough. But over time, I realized that experienced scholars also reread. They underline, they take notes, they return to the same page many times. Good readers are not people who understand everything instantly. They are people who are willing to stay with uncertainty a little longer. I think that realization changed the way I read forever. Now, when I open a new novel or an academic article, I don't ask myself, what is the correct interpretation? Instead, I ask, what is this text inviting me to notice? That small shift makes reading much more enjoyable and much more meaningful. So, if there is one idea I hope you take away from today's episode, it is this: don't stop at the story. Go one step further. Ask questions. Notice patterns. Pay attention to details. Read slowly because literature begins where summary ends. Thank you so much for joining me for the very second episode of Reading Practice. So, in the next episode, we will continue to develop our reading skills by exploring another essential question: how do symbols actually work in literature, and how can we recognize them without over interpreting a text? Until then, happy reading, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!